what we're going to talk about now is generics. Now, generics in TypeScript, they're exactly what you know that they are in C# or in Java, which is really just a way to make your code more reusable. And really what generics are is just something that we have in programming where we can work with a variety of types. You can have, for example, one method or one class, and you can work with different data types with that same class or that same method. And as I go through the examples that I'm going to show you, it's all going to make sense. It's better that I show you examples and cases where you would want to use a generic instead of trying to, define what the generics are. But it's really just a way to make your code more reusable. So for example, let's say I'm going to have a function, and let's say I'm going to call the function update user, for example. Now, I know the function is going to take some parameter. It's going to return something. So I'm not going to put the return type now just so I can illustrate this better. And let's put the body of the method. So what I want to do, for example, let's say I'm going to receive two objects, for example. So I don't know what those objects are going to be. I don't know the shape of them. I don't know the type of them, but I know I'm going to get two objects inside of this method. And what I would like to do is to just merge the two objects and then return one object. So what I can do is I can come in here and I can say, let's say old user, for example. So we're going to take an old user. That's going to be any, for example. And we're going to take the new user information, for example. Also, that's going to be any, because you can use any when you want to go back to JavaScript. Technically, you don't have any type at all. And we can also say that this is going to return any because we have two any types and we're returning two any types. And then in the body of the function, what we can do is we can just return a new object, right? So we're going to put open and close curly braces. And then inside of there, we can just merge the two objects that we know what we're going to get. So we're going to say, use the spread operator, get the old user, and then spread operator again, get the new user. So what this is going to do is it's going to take all the properties in the two objects and then merge them. So whatever we already have in the old user is going to be overridden by what we have in the new user. And if there is something in the old user that's not in the new user, then it's going to stay. And that's just one way that we can merge two objects. You just make a copy of them and you put them inside of the curly braces, and then you have a new object. Now, using any here, as you can see, is not a very good practice because we're technically saying, hey, we're going back to JavaScript. Now, another thing we can do here is we can use generics. And what that means is that we know that this is going to be of some type. We just don't know what type it's going to be. So whatever type it is, then that's the type that it's going to be for these two objects. And the syntax is like this. So I would come into after the name of the method, and then I put opening and closing diamonds. And then let's say the first type is going to be T, and then the second type is going to be U. Or I can use V here. I can use any letters like Z. Oops. I can use Z. I can use anything that I want. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and use, for example, V, right? And then here, instead of any, I can just change this to T. And then the second type, it's going to be of some type that's going to be V. And that's going to do the trick. Now, since we're merging these two objects together, then it's going to give us a merge of these two objects. So a merge of T and V. So instead of any, we're going to do, it's going to be T and V, because we're going to merge all these two together. And you can see that we were getting an error, and now the error is gone. So now I can pass in two objects inside of this update user, and then it's going to merge the two objects into one object and return that to me. And another example that I can show you. So if I copy this, for example, and then comment it out, we're going to use it in a second. I just want to show you. So for example, if we were going to take one object, we could just do this. So we would say we're going to take T, which is going to be some kind of user. So I'm going to change this to user and remove that one. And then let's remove this as well, because this time we're just going to return T. And then here, all we have to return is this type T, or we can return anything that we want, because really all this is saying is we're going to receive a type that we don't know, but we know that it's going to be of some type. And we're just saying here that it's going to return that same type. So whatever we do here, as long as we return the same type. So for example, I can say, all right, just give me everything in user, and let's add another property. So I can say admin, and that's going to be, for example, true, right? So that's just adding another new property inside of the object that we're gonna get. We can rename this like make admin, for example, right? So we're gonna take a user, we're gonna add this admin property, set it to true, and then return that new object. So whatever we get here with how many properties that we get doesn't really matter. We're just gonna copy everything that we already get, and then we're just gonna put this admin to true and then return that. So let me uncomment this. So now I can come down here and I can say and let's say user 1, if I don't already have that, and set it equal to some object. So here I can say, for example, they're gonna have a name. So I can do name and then set it to my name. Here I'm just gonna say Junior. So that's user 1. Then I'm gonna duplicate this and let's do user 2. User 2 is just gonna have an age. So I'm going to put some age here. So let's say 25. And then I'm going to change this to age. So age. And we can add more properties here. So I can say is or gender, for example. And gender is going to be like a string. So I'm going to put like M, for example. And we're going to change this to user2. So now we have two users. You can see that they're not the same. We have two different types of user here. We have one which is an object that contains a name property, and then we have another one that has an age and a gender. And I can call this update user with this two objects that I have here, and it's not gonna complain or anything. I'm just saying here that I'm gonna get two different objects because this is T and this is V, and the first one is gonna be of type T and the second one is gonna be of type V. And what this means is that whatever type that this is, that's going to be what that type is, and that's going to be the type of this first parameter. And for the V, whatever the second parameter is, that's going to be the type of that. Which type is that? We don't know, which is why we can do whatever we want in these objects. We can, add more properties we want. We can add an array. We can do whatever we want. As long as this code will work whenever we call the function with the parameters that we're passing it in, we should be just fine. So now I'm going to come down and I'm just going to say update user, and then I'm gonna pass it user1 and user2. And you can see that it's not complaining, it's not doing anything because we're just passing in two different types, and that's exactly what I'm specifying here. And we can console log that. So let's do console.log so that we can see something on the output. So if I go ahead and run this, we're gonna see that these two objects are gonna be merged, which is what we're doing here. So like I said, whatever we take here doesn't really matter. So we can specify whatever type we want, V, T, doesn't really matter. The only thing that really matters is what we do inside of this body of the method. Because if we do something that doesn't go with the type that we're passing, then we get a problem. And this is supposed to be user2. So let's change this to 2. And let's go ahead and run it. You can see now we have the merge of the two objects. You can see we have the name, then we have the age, the gender, and I can do the same with the make admin. So let's go down, copy this, and then paste it. This time I'm gonna call the make admin. So I'm gonna copy this, paste the name here, and pass in just the, let's pass in the second user because it has more properties, just so we can see something. And then go ahead and run it again. You can see now we get the second one, which is the age of 25, gender is male, and the admin now is true. So we added this new property inside of it. So the takeaway with this is whatever object that I pass in here will work because I'm just merging the two together. Now, the only time you're gonna have a problem is if we pass something inside of this method. Pretty much anything will work here because we're just specifying a type, we just don't know what it is. But it's the code that we have inside of the method. We have to make sure that is safe, because if someone passed me a string here, is this gonna fail? If they pass me a number, is it gonna fail? What if I do let age, for example, and then set it equal to, let's say 55. And let's rename this to user age because it's giving me an error. That means I've used this variable at some point in the past. So now let's change this to, instead of user2, we're gonna pass in the user age. Again, you can see that it's not giving me an error. So as long as we make sure that the code inside of the method is safe, it's not going to fail. If they pass me like, a Boolean or an object or a number or something like that, then we should be fine. That's the biggest thing you have to keep in mind when you're working with generics with the method in TypeScript, because it's the operations that you're doing inside of the method that really is important. You have to make sure that you really think carefully about. So now let's comment this out and let's go ahead and run it again and see what we got. So now you can see this is just giving me the first object because it wasn't able to do anything with that number. So that's the only thing you have to keep in mind when you're working with generics with the method. You have to make sure that the operations you're doing inside of the method doesn't fail or doesn't behave weirdly or something like that whenever you call it with different types. So the only thing we know that we're doing inside of here is we know that we're supposed to call this update user with two different objects because we're merging these two objects inside of the body. So as long as it's two objects, we should be fine. So what happens if we pass an array? So let's just do this. Let's turn this into an array and let's say this is gonna be 55 and let's say 20 and see what happens. So now if I go ahead and run this, you can see now we get the array because an array is kind of considered of an object. So it gives us the index and then the value is going to be the value that we pass. So the index value. So it was able to merge this array because really an array is an object. So like I said, whenever you're using this format or you're using this format, just make sure you call the method or function with a proper type depending on the operation that you're doing inside of the method, because that's where really the only problem can occur, because it's never going to give you a problem if you pass anything here. Like I can change this to a Boolean if you When I see that, see I changed it to a Boolean. What that means is that this user age is gonna be of type Boolean. That's all it's gonna do. It's not really doing anything else. So really just make sure that whatever, operations that you're doing inside of the method work appropriately for the data that you're passing whenever you call the method.